Delahunty.
Mr Speaker, the Green Party has some major concerns about this bill. We are supporters of aquaculture, particularly in the appropriate places, but we think opening up public space, which is highly contested, with a bill of this nature is a recipe for ongoing conflict. And what we're concerned about is years and years of work that's been done, and particularly in the area where I live, in the Coromandel-Hauraki area, where Environment Waikato and a stakeholders group worked in detail on a plan that's been overridden. And that's our concern. Not that aquaculture can't be developed and not that aquaculture hasn't got a lot to contribute, but that those people who've all been in touch with me are deeply concerned that their whole process was a waste of time and it's been marginalised while powers have been given to the Minister. So although we agree in principle the aspiration is declared in the commentary, which is to, quote, achieve an efficient legislative and regulatory framework that would enable the sustainable development of aquaculture within the coastal marine area, we support that idea. We don't think, given the difficulties we've seen, that this bill will achieve that. It does make sense to develop some enabling legislation that focuses on genuine sustainability and long-term strategy and action, but this bill is not it. The declared position of the government and other supporters of the bill is that we need to facilitate aquaculture above other activities. And it's being touted as the next billion-dollar industry, which reminds me of kiwi fruit or goats or whatever. Whatever is the great gold rush, without thinking about the long-term consequences of what is a very complex and contested space, i.e. the marine environment. And we're yet to have an oceans policy, we're yet to have all kinds of policies in place before we start carving up and selling off these rights. And the enthusiasm to allow for rapid industry development needs to be tempered by ecological and social constraints that this bill falls short of. If we're going to do away with aquaculture management areas or some similar provision of designated space, this will open up what many submitters at the Select Committee did refer to as a gold rush. The proposals around sequencing of applications by amending Clause 35 do very little to change the first-in, first-served default position, which means there will be pressure on applicants to submit an adequate proposal rather than devote time to preparing a more sustainable one. Now, there's been repeated references in the first reading and at the committee and by the government that we need the aquaculture industry to be normalised within the RMA and treated more or less like any other activity. This denies the reality that issuing permits to use marine areas for aquaculture effectively denies public access in favour of allowing for exclusive use of what is currently public domain. Recreational boaties and fishers are particularly concerned by these proposed changes. And I'm very aware of this because I held 2 public meetings in the Hauraki area, in Coromandel and Thames, and it was attended by recreational boaties and commercial fishermen, and they raised major concerns about the issues. And there were no other public events held except for a very strange consultation process run by the government, which no one in our area knew the status of, outcomes of, and which was pushed through very rapidly and didn't connect to this bill in a clear way. And it has concerned confusion, it has resulted in confusion and concern right across our region about what this bill does, particularly to the Waikato. And the local member says it's rubbish, but then she wasn't actually there at the meetings and hasn't engaged public with the issues, and no one's heard her talk about it, so we don't really know what her view is. I have heard what the fishermen actually say about it because they're concerned about opening up this area, not only for aquaculture as we know it, which is a well-established industry, which a lot of us support, but also for cage fish farming in a way that is utterly risky economically and environmentally. So the marine farming industry is effectively freeloading if it's allowed to generate substantial profit but pay no resource rental to the Crown for extracting nutrients, impeding alternative public access or use, degrading landscape and seascape and amenity values. And we have to ask the question, who is really benefiting here and why is this going ahead? Because marine farmers do not pay rates. If this was land, they would be paying rates for what they do to the environment. And lots of aquaculture is well managed. But some of the proposals that are on the table that can be opened up through this legislation without proper input from the public, without regional decision making and without the stakeholders who've worked on these issues for years are of great concern and involve threats to the environment which we have not seen before in this country. And I am talking about the subcracks of the sea, I am talking about the potential for cage fish farming, which is not sustainable. And there is a proposal to do that in the Hauraki Gulf right now. The mechanisms proposed for the issue of the permits are sufficiently complex and require the participation and agreement of so many different and conflicting interests that we doubt that outcome will meet the practice in terms of anybody's wants or needs. And while the proposal to allow for consideration of any undue adverse effects on fishing, which is one of the key issues for the fishing community, to be carried out in parallel with the RMA process seems reasonable. In practice, there will be enormous pressure on the Ministry of Fisheries to consent to the granting of a permit if the relevant regional council has indicated its approval. It is highly undesirable that consultation with affected parties be at the discretion of the Ministry, rather than mandated as proposed in new Section 186D. I refer to a very good submission from the Environmental Defence Society to the Select Committee because they made some excellent points. And one of them was referred to, I think, by the previous speaker. The Minister of Aquaculture's powers to recommend regulation to amend regional coastal plans under clauses 65 and 96 should be removed. The Green Party thinks they are unnecessary. And it is interesting that Moana raised the issue of precedent, because how many other ministers are going to get what powers? I mean, are we going to give more power on land as well to ministers to decide on mining, for example? I'm sure that would be equally unwelcome as a gold rush in the marine environment. The other functions of the Minister of Agriculture introduced by Clause 65 of the bill, including suspending receipt of applications for coastal permits, authorising aquaculture activities, and making a direction to process and hear together applications for coastal permits, should be removed. These functions should be undertaken by the Minister for the Environment on advice from the Minister for the Environment, rather than the Minister having the say-so over these issues. So EDS also made some very good points with regard to the Tasman Regional Council Plan and the Waikato Regional Coastal Plan under set clauses 100 and 101, and we support them being removed from this bill because we don't believe they're in the long-term interest of the industry, let alone the environment. And we support the points that were made at the Select Committee about the undermining of the integrity of the RMA, although I don't know why we would expect the government to listen, because they've already undermined its integrity on a lot of fronts and imagine that will continue. But what they're doing is undermining public confidence in the RMA. Underlying the public confidence in the RMA is a serious matter, because no matter what powers you give to the minister, people will fight back about their space. And you've got a huge Auckland community as well as a huge Coromandel community who use that space. And the other key point that we support EDS on is the issue of favouring one activity over another. The provisions favour aquaculture against a myriad of other activities. So we've got a lot of issues, and we don't believe the proposed changes are necessary. We believe that we have got RMA processes that should be respected, and we believe that we should actually consider all the work that's gone on in the past. Now, finally, I do want to talk about the specific example which I'm familiar with, which is under the current opening up of places like the Hauraki Gulf, Te Kapamoana, there is a proposal to bring in a totally new sort of aquaculture. Cage fish, hapuka, kingfish. And it's entirely unproven if you look at overseas examples. Are we going to import fish meal? And we asked people at public meetings where else this was going to come from. Are we going to import small coastal fish species out of other people's catchments to feed bigger fish inside cages? Now, the fishing community is concerned about disease. The environment community is concerned about pollution. But in the end, it's also an ethical and moral issue about other people's fisheries. And it isn't going to make money, if that's what you guys are only interested in. It isn't going to make money if you have to pay more to bring in the fish to make the other fish get big and fat. If you want to export fish, why don't we look after our fisheries, allow our wild fish to be healthy, and then export those fish? Because actually, that's proven technology. But cage fish farming, sow crates of the sea, is highly resisted by many people in the Coromandel area who support aquaculture. And like the Tasman area, there are a lot of people who support aquaculture, but what they want is fair planning, and they don't want new forms of technology around fishing and cage fish to be in conflict. And they are very concerned that this is not only uneconomic but also environmentally risky to bring in cage fish under a bill like this and wipe out all the work that's been done in the district to try and make our aquaculture management areas properly planned. It's always been controversial.
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member. Her time has expired.
Kia ora tātou.
I call Rahui Carthen.